But now we're going to move on to Ernest Henry, and Dr. Vladimir Lisitsin from the GSQ is going to tell us about the lithogeochemistry of that composite.
Okay, let me make sure that I'm on the right screen. Do you see the right screen? Or do you see the presenter screen?
It's just coming. Hold on.
Good.
Yes, we've got the right screen.
Okay, good. So I'm going to talk briefly about geochemical signatures and footprints of Ernest Henry. So it's, even though dominantly geochemical, but as soon as we get outside the deposit, we need to start using mineralogical footprints as well for cross-validation. So the motivation of this whole exercise was this work which we have done on the geochemistry and mineralogy is largely to identify nearly complete multi-element geochemical signatures of Ernest Henry with the focus on variability of the signatures, because there is a fair bit of information available in the public domain about
I think Vlad is frozen. We'll just give him a second to come back in. In the meantime, Jim, oh, here he is. He's back.
Yes, am I dropping out?
Yes,
I'm back.
Dropped out. Yep.
Okay, so second is to try and characterize geochemical mineralogical footprints in sparse data. So something equivalent to real-life near-miss situations, and to try and cross-validate geochemistry and mineralogy for joint interpretation, which is required. So sample distribution, we collected a great deal over the years, and sampling was done in several campaigns, starting from the previous GSQ-funded CSIRO project 7 years ago. Then CSIRO and cohorts and ourselves did the next round of sampling in our core library, and then we did our own. And in this presentation, we're only talking about bulk geochemistry and very, very little about bulk mineralogy alteration. And our collaborators in CSIRO and cohorts, they're working on many of the same samples, focusing on other aspects of alteration footprints, many of which indeed are likely to be invisible in bulk chemistry. So we cover up a pretty substantial area of over 6 kilometers from south to north. We have a good representation of different parts of the ore body, getting out of it at a spacing of 10, 20, 50 meters up and down drill course, and then stepping out at hundreds of meters away from mineralization to see if we can still see something there, and then gradually going out 4 or 5 kilometers, mostly to the northeast. So a quick snapshot of what mineralization looks like. It's near typical K-spar magnetite with variable calcite ore breccia. And even though that's the dominant type of mineralization at Ernest Henry, it's by far the best known. It is not the only mineralogical variant of mineralization. There are other kinds with actinolite, calcite, biotite. And further out, it's a biotite magnetite with disseminated chalcopyrite. So now let's do a quick deep dive into full geochemistry. It's 67 elements using best methods, robust and sensitive. So we can see a very complex polymetallic signature, commonly regarded as typical in ICGs in the Cloncurry district, but it's very atypical. It's very typical for Ernest Henry, pretty much. And for the purists of statistical analysis of geochemical data, yes, it was done on central log ratio transformed data, so don't worry. It's not all that bad. And symbology for samples here and elsewhere in the presentation, the sizes of symbols are copper grades. And colors, the intensity of principal component 1, which is essentially this polymetallic signature of Ernest Henry O. And this is that typical, very polymetallic signature, which is quite similar to that of Olympic Dam and quite dissimilar from everything else in Cloncurry district. Slightly more intuitive way to illustrate geochemical signature using element enrichment. It's pretty much essentially the same story. We see the elements which co-vary with copper, gold, silver, but also includes some elements which are not strongly enriched, like uranium, light rare earth, tin, manganese, fluorine. So even though they're not significantly enriched, they're quite typical parts of the signature for Ernest Henry. And one element not shown here, but commonly enriched is iron, and the other one is calcium. But those two are enriched in by a significant percentage, sometimes by a factor, and the traces present in the ore are commonly enriched by orders of magnitude. Now a quick look at geochemical signatures of important major trace elements, well, major elements, which I consider very important in and around Ernest Henry. So first of all, sodium over potassium. So we can see a very tight area characterizing Ernest Henry ore body. And that's a very particular position for Ernest Henry. Just about every other deposit in the Cloncurry district would go much lower. It would sit much closer to sodium than to potassium, and varying trends varying horizontally, not vertically. And there is an interesting indication here of a K-spot to Muscovite trend. So it's never going quite towards Muscovite, but verging towards that. And the typical hematite dominant ICGs of the Gola Craton, they're sitting just a little bit to the bottom of this area. So Olympic Dam sits there. But it's not just about sodium and potassium bringing into the picture calcium. So again, we see a very tight position of the Ernest Henry ore body, which is occupied by just Ernest Henry ore body and nothing else. And calcium, well, even though this diagram was often used to decipher chemistry of feldspars. In this case, it's not about feldspars, not so much. It's not so much about sodium calcic alteration. It's more related to carbonate alteration with calcite. Thrown into the mix of major elements of that matter iron. So the ore body geochemistry stands out just like in the previous slides, although much less compact for various reasons. And there is notable iron enrichment here, and in this case, it doesn't have anything to do with, not so much to do with biotite, it's mostly iron and magnetite. And trying to display it all together on a single slide, sodium, potassium, calcium, iron, manganese in a composite signature. Here I'm just plotting it on the ICGL discrimination diagram proposed back in 2013 by Jean-François Montreuil, Louis Carrevaux, and Eric Gransky. So this diagram was designed to identify metasomatic phases of ICG systems. It's not used for the same purpose here. So quite deliberately, we're not shying away from the fact that these are composite signatures, including partial alteration, overprinting relationships, and veining. But this is the bulk overall composite signatures, which are visible in normal bulk geochemical samples. And mostly in the ore body and around the signatures are relatively pure. So the metasomatic processes, mineralization went pretty strongly overprinting pre-existing geochemistry. And as we're stepping out away from the ore body, these alteration signatures become more and more complex, weaker, composite because of incomplete, partial, weak alteration and replacement. And quickly have a look at how it sits in space. So the bar from left to right, it's about 4 kilometers to the 4.5 kilometers to the north of Ernest Henry. And we can clearly see the very strong polymetallic signature in the ore body, and quite common popping up with relatively high frequency within 1 kilometer. And within that 1 kilometer, it's overlapping with wider, more easily recognizable alteration halos of potassic feldspar, magnetite, carbonates. We can push this geochemical signature by another kilometer very tentatively, because the signature in bulk chemistry becomes quite diluted, just because of the nature of alteration, which becomes less pervasive. And here it is coinciding with biotite magnetite with rare K feldspar. So pretty much this proximal 2 kilometers, that's where we can use bulk geochemistry and cross-validated by mineralogy to identify that we are indeed within distal footprints likely to be within the distal footprints of the Ernest Henry deposit. And beyond that, it is much more likely that we're seeing the signature of regional geochemical mineral system in relatively weak sodic alteration. It's L-bite overprinting pre-existing plagioclases. And in bulk mineralogy, same as in bulk chemistry, the signal is quite often dominated by residual minerals from the host rock. So this is most likely the signature, distal signature of the mineral system. And the hot colors, the ones which are identified by commonly higher copper and hot colors, characteristic for polymetallic signature of Ernest Henry mineralization, it is not unlikely to be representing more proximal signature of something else, which is not out of the question. It would be an interesting possibility to consider. And things are more complicated in the proximity of the ore body. There is fine resonation. Indeed, there is a dominantly feldspar dominant alteration in and around ore body. An interesting thing which we didn't know until we did high-log mineralogy is that within the ore body, it's autoclase and outside is microcline. And in deeper parts of the ore body, we have actinolite calcite veins with chalcopyrite. And geochemistry highlighting here shows thallium, which was a curious element showing consistent enrichment going away from Ernest Henry ore body to the west, and making the sizes, the signals of multi-element geochemistry typical for Ernest Henry just wider. And this is all I have time to say about mineralogy. So by way of a quick conclusion, there is a complex polymetallic signature confirming what we knew before, and it's quite consistent, and within the ore body it's not changing that much. And proximal K feldspar magnetite dominant alteration, it is quite strong, pervasive and strong within 1 kilometer from the ore body. Mixed geochemical mineralogical signatures due to weak alteration can be identifiable up to 2 kilometers away, but that's where it's strongly anisotropic. So along the northeastern trend, we can see it much further away, and across quite often it disappears in a matter of tens to maybe a few hundred meters. And the general impression we have so far is that as soon as we get out of the easily identifiable footprints of the first kilometer, we do need complementary data sets to be more confident in interpretation. And that's where we're heading right now with our good colleagues and collaborators from Siren Codes. So I shall leave it at that.
Thanks, Vlad.
Thank you.
No, excellent. Thank you very much. We haven't got any questions in the Q&A right now, so I might move along